In the heart of Manhattan's corporate elite, one unexpected moment changes everything. Don't miss this story. Like, comment, and subscribe. The marble floors of Yamato Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters gleamed under the morning light, polished to the point where they reflected every beam from the towering glass panels. It was Monday, and the lobby buzzed with the quiet urgency of the financial district. People in sharp suits moved quickly, their voices low, their eyes fixed on phones or the day's agenda. The scent of fresh orchids mixed with the faint tang of disinfectant, a sign that someone had been here long before dawn, making sure everything was perfect. Among those early arrivals was Clarice Jenkins. At 52, she wore the standard gray uniform issued to the cleaning staff, a pair of well-worn white sneakers, and a faded apron with building services stitched over the chest pocket. Her short, neatly braided hair was pulled back, and her gloves fit snug over hands that had known both the smooth touch of conference microphones and the rough grip of a mop handle. This was her third floor of the morning. She pushed her cart with quiet efficiency, her movements almost ghost-like as she stopped to adjust a glove or swap out a cleaning cloth. No one greeted her. No one asked her name. She had long ago stopped expecting either. Once in another life, Clarice had been impossible to overlook. She had been a rising star in the world of international interpretation, fluent in English, French, Swahili, and Japanese. Not conversationally, not good enough to get by, but fluent. Her Japanese was so crisp and refined that native speakers sometimes blinked twice, surprised to hear such precision from someone who looked nothing like them. She had learned the language in Tokyo, not from textbooks, but from life itself, absorbing the rhythms and cadences until they became a part of her. But that was long ago, before she traded conference booths for janitor closets, before she swapped the hum of simultaneous translation for the steady swish of a mop across a polished floor. By 7:15 a.m., Clarice reached the 42nd floor. This was the executive level, the top of the food chain. The air seemed different here, lighter but charged, as though it carried the weight of decisions worth millions. The decor was understated luxury. Muted gray walls, modern art installations, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was the kind of place where people spoke softly but wielded influence like a blade. Clarice handled this floor with extra care, not because anyone had told her to, but because she understood more here than she let on. Every now and then, a passing executive would murmur something in French to a colleague or speak in low Japanese to a client. She understood all of it. She had always been a listener, even when the conversation wasn't meant for her. As she crouched down to scrub the base of a glass wall near the conference room, two young interns passed by, their voices just above a whisper. "He's flying in today," one said. "Who?" "The founder. From Tokyo." "You mean Mr. Yamamoto?" "Yeah, Shinji Yamamoto. First time in, 9 years? The actual guy himself." Clarice's hand froze mid-scrub. That name. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 2 decades. Not since Tokyo, not since before her life had shifted completely. She remembered him well, not as the silver-haired global business icon plastered across financial magazines, but as the young, intense executive who had sat at the far end of a translation booth during a high-stakes technology summit in Osaka. She had been his interpreter for that event, one of the biggest assignments of her career. He had spoken with precision and conviction, and she had matched his rhythm flawlessly. She remembered the subtle nod he'd given her afterward, one of those rare acknowledgments that told her she'd done more than just translate. She had helped him connect. She let out a quiet breath and returned to her work, sponge gliding over the glass in slow circles. That was a lifetime ago. Now she was here to clean the floor before people stepped on it. By 9:45, the air on the 42nd floor had changed. The tension was palpable. Staff moved with the focused energy of a stage crew before curtain call. A fresh bouquet of white orchids appeared on the reception desk. Catering trays rolled in and were meticulously arranged in the small lounge. The receptionist, a young man in a fitted navy suit, repeatedly practiced a Japanese greeting under his breath, tripping over the syllables each time. Clarice continued her work quietly near the main elevator, polishing the marble to a mirror shine. She didn't need anyone to explain what was going on. She could feel it in the way the executives stood straighter, spoke less, and glanced toward the elevator every time the chime sounded. At exactly 10 a.m., it did. The elevator doors slid open, and Shinji Yamamoto stepped out. He was older now, his once black hair streaked with silver, but his posture remained straight, his eyes sharp and scanning the room with the calm authority of someone used to commanding without raising his voice. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly, a white silk pocket square folded with precision, and an expression that was unreadable, yet utterly focused. Two assistants flanked him, along with a corporate translator wearing an earpiece. The executive team lined up like soldiers, offering stiff bows and formal greetings. Clarice instinctively stepped back toward her cart, lowering her gaze. She had no intention of drawing attention, but fate didn't care about her intentions. A junior analyst, hurrying to step aside for the CEO, clipped the side of her mop bucket. The handle wobbled, and a wave of soapy water sloshed onto the pristine marble. The sound seemed to echo in the otherwise silent lobby. A few startled gasps followed. Clarice moved quickly, bending down to control the spill. Just as Yamamoto approached, she looked up, not timidly, but with the calm clarity of habit, and spoke in flawless Japanese. "Please watch your step, Mr. Yamamoto." The words cut clean through the air. They weren't just correct. They were refined, the kind of Japanese few non-natives could pull off. The translator froze mid-step. Yamamoto stopped, eyes locking on her face. For the first time in 20 years, Clarice Jenkins found herself noticed. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. The executives flanking the reception desk shifted uncomfortably, unsure what they had just witnessed. Yamamoto's gaze stayed fixed on Clarice, his sharp eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in calculation, like someone piecing together a memory from long ago. He took a single step closer, the lobby's low hum fading until the only sound was the soft hum of the air vents. His voice, when it came, was in Japanese, measured, deliberate. "Your Japanese is perfect. Where did you learn it?" Clarice straightened slowly, the mop handle still in her hand. "I studied at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies," she replied, her tone steady. "I used to interpret at international conferences." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Clarice Jenkins," he said, switching effortlessly to English. "Is that correct?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. That's my name. You interpreted for me once. Osaka, 1992. Clarice blinked, caught off guard. "You remember that?" "I never forget a voice," Yamamoto said simply, "especially one that saved a deal." Her mind flicked back to that night in Osaka, thick cigarette smoke in the air, the low murmur of high-stakes negotiations, and Yamamoto delivering a joke that had fallen flat in English. She had reshaped it on the fly, adapting it so it worked for the American executives in the room. The laughter that followed had shifted the mood entirely, and the deal was signed hours later. It had been one of her proudest moments, but no one in this building had any idea it had ever happened. Yamamoto glanced toward his assistant and spoke quickly in Japanese. The assistant nodded once and walked away. Then Yamamoto turned back to Clarice. "Will you walk with me?" For a moment she hesitated. The mop was still in her grip, the water still puddled on the marble. She could feel the weight of every eye in the lobby. Her supervisor stood frozen, mouth slightly open, as if unsure whether to intervene. Clarice set the mop gently against her cart. "Yes, Mr. Yamamoto," she said. As they moved toward the executive elevator, the room seemed to split around them. Employees stepped aside, silent, watching the CEO and the janitor walk together as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Somewhere behind them, she caught a hushed voice whisper. "Who is she?" Inside the elevator, the doors closed with a soft chime. For a beat, there was silence. Then Yamamoto chuckled quietly. "You surprised them," he said. Clarice allowed herself a faint smile. "I've been doing that all my life. They just don't usually notice." "How long have you worked here?" 5 years, she said. Before that, I was a freelance interpreter. Tokyo, Kyoto, New York, Geneva. Then I got married. My husband was in the Marine Corps. We moved back to the States, had 2 sons. He was deployed to Iraq and... She paused for a moment. He didn't come home. Yamamoto's expression softened. "I'm sorry." She nodded, looking straight ahead. "After that, I couldn't find steady work in interpretation. Everyone wanted younger people with domestic credentials. So I took the work I could find." "You didn't forget your languages." "No," Clarice said. "I just stopped being asked to use them." The elevator slowed, and the doors opened into the executive boardroom on the 43rd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline in golden morning light. The conference table gleamed under pendant lights, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood. Yamamoto gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit." Clarice sat, her posture straight, her expression calm. "Tell me," he said, folding his hands on the table, "if you were to advise this company on culture, on cross-language communication, where would you begin?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd start with how you listen. Too often, people here talk to impress, not to understand. They translate words, but not intentions. That's why deals fail, because no one is really hearing." Yamamoto leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on her. "And internally?" "Stop mistaking silence for ignorance," Clarice said evenly. "Some of your most observant people never speak because no one's given them a reason to." For a moment, he said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You still speak like an interpreter?" "I never stopped being one," Clarice replied. "Even with a mop in my hand." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Come," he said. "Let's see if we can change that." And without another word, he led her toward a conversation that would alter the course of her life. That afternoon, the 42nd floor lobby hummed with the usual corporate rhythm. Footsteps, the ding of arriving elevators, the low chatter of assistants running messages between offices. But then, without warning, the air shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence as Shinji Yamamoto stepped into the center of the space, flanked by his assistant and the head of Global Human Resources. "Gather, please," Yamamoto said in clear, steady English. Employees emerged from offices, hallways, and break rooms, forming a loose circle. Clarice, unsure why she'd been called, stood to the side. She kept her hands folded, eyes scanning the room. "Many of you," Yamamoto began, "witnessed an unexpected moment this morning. Some of you were surprised." He let the pause stretch, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I was not." He turned toward Clarice and gestured for her to step forward. She hesitated only for a second before moving to stand beside him. "What did surprise me," Yamamoto continued, "was that none of you knew who she was." He looked at her with something between respect and recognition. "This is Ms. Clarice Jenkins, former international interpreter, graduate of Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. She once saved a billion-dollar merger of mine with her voice." The silence was absolute. Even the hum of the air vents seemed to fade. "And today," Yamamoto said, his voice carrying, "I learned she's been mopping our floors. That ends now. Effective immediately, Ms. Jenkins is our new Director of Cross-Cultural Strategy." Whispers rippled through the gathered employees like wind through tall grass. A VP blinked hard, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. The building director shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie. Clarice stood still, her face calm, though inside she felt the ground tilt beneath her. She wasn't a janitor in this moment. She wasn't invisible. She was being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Over the next week, her life transformed. Her new office was on the 43rd floor with a view of the Hudson River. She had 2 assistants and a consulting budget. But Clarice didn't use any of it to distance herself from where she'd come from. She still stopped by the maintenance rooms to chat with the janitors. She greeted the security guards by name. She ate lunch with people in the break room instead of retreating to the executive lounge. Her approach was deliberate. Change would not come from lofty speeches alone. It would come from shifting the culture in the smallest of ways. She began by holding short morning workshops with department heads, cultural empathy sessions, she called them. They discussed how communication styles varied across countries, how what sounded confident in one culture could sound aggressive in another. She introduced Language Moments, a 5-minute segment in which staff shared phrases from their native languages and explained their meaning beyond translation. She launched a cross-training program that allowed entry-level employees to observe high-level meetings once a month, not to participate, but to listen and learn. And when she spoke to them afterward, she always asked the same question. What did you hear that no one else noticed? Some executives were skeptical at first, but slowly the atmosphere began to shift. Meetings grew less performative, more purposeful. People paused to ask clarifying questions. The quiet employees, the ones who usually sat in the back, began speaking up. One afternoon, an intern named Jose stopped her in the hallway. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice unsteady, "I didn't know who you were before all this, but now that I do, it gives me hope. Like maybe I don't have to fit into some mold to belong here." Clarice smiled. "You don't have to be noticed to be valuable, Jose. But once you are noticed, don't shrink back. Let them see you." By the end of her first month in the role, Clarice had become more than a department head. She had become a symbol. For employees from immigrant backgrounds, she was living proof that someone who looked like them, spoke like them, and understood them could rise to the top. And yet, she hadn't abandoned the traits that made her who she was. She still wore the same simple shoes. She still spoke softly. She still listened more than she talked. But the difference now was that when she spoke, people listened. One morning, the VP of Communications walked into her office holding a blue folder. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, "Mr. Yamamoto wants you to give the keynote speech at the Global Leadership Summit next quarter, in Tokyo." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "Me?" He smiled. He said it's about time they heard from someone who knows what real leadership sounds like. Clarice closed the folder slowly. "All right," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Let's give them something to remember." 3 months later, the vast auditorium in Tokyo glowed under stage lights. Rows of polished seats stretched to the back of the room, filled with over 2,000 executives, analysts, interpreters, and rising leaders from across the globe. The Global Leadership Summit was the kind of event where every word was recorded, every gesture dissected, and every speaker carefully vetted. On the giant screen behind the podium, her name appeared in English and Japanese. Clarice Jenkins, Director of Cross-Cultural Strategy, Yamato Enterprises. Clarice stepped onto the stage in a tailored navy suit, a simple microphone headset resting against her cheek. No excess jewelry, no dramatic flair, just a steady presence that commanded the room without demanding it. The applause swelled, then faded to an expectant hush. "I want to tell you a story," she began, her voice carrying easily in the stillness, "about a woman who used to sit in the back of rooms like this, who translated words so others could be heard. Even though no one ever asked her to speak for herself." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "That woman was me." The audience leaned forward. "For years, I thought that if I stayed useful, if I stayed quiet, the world would keep me safe. But silence doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you small." Her words were deliberate, unhurried. "One day, I found myself cleaning the floors of a building where I once interpreted billion-dollar conversations, not because I wasn't qualified, but because I had stopped believing I had permission to speak. A few heads nodded in the crowd. Others sat completely still, eyes fixed on her. "Some of you may feel that way now," she continued. "Like your voice doesn't matter unless it comes from the right title, the right background, the right appearance." She stepped forward slightly. "Let me tell you something. You don't need a title to have wisdom. You don't need a degree from the right country to have value. And you certainly don't need permission to speak the truth." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The quiet conviction in her voice filled the space more powerfully than any shout could. "I spent years walking hallways where people never looked at me, and then, one day I spoke. Not to impress, not to protest, just to warn someone to watch his step, but that moment uncovered something I had forgotten. I was never less than. I had only been unseen." She let the words hang, giving the audience time to absorb them. "Now I stand here, not because I was given a seat at the table," she said, her gaze steady, "but because I built my own." She closed her speech there, allowing the silence to linger for a heartbeat before stepping back. The applause started softly, then grew until the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping and cheering. It lasted nearly a full minute. Clarice didn't bow deeply or wave. She simply smiled, her expression calm and grounded. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't shaken. She was ready. The next morning, an email waited in her inbox. The subject line read, "For your courage." Inside was a scanned page from a company newsletter in Tokyo, dated 1992. A small, black-and-white photo of her younger self in a headset, mid-translation, at the Osaka conference where Yamamoto had first spoken about global expansion. Beneath the image was a short, handwritten note. "Some voices never fade. Thank you for reminding me of yours." That's why Clarice printed the photo and framed it, placing it in the corner of her office desk next to a vase of fresh red camellias. Back in New York, Yamato Enterprises made a subtle but permanent change to its lobby. Beneath the company's mission statement, a new plaque was mounted. In honor of Clarice Jenkins, whose voice reminded us that brilliance is not always loud, and leadership is not always in a suit. Below that, in both English and Japanese, was a single line. "Don't wait to be invited to the table. Speak and build your own." Every morning after that, coffee in hand, Clarice walked past the plaque and nodded warmly to the cleaning staff she once worked alongside. They greeted her with pride, with respect, with the kind of acknowledgement she had once thought impossible. She never stopped saying good morning to the people the world overlooked, because she had been them. And now that the world was listening, she wasn't going to let it forget what it had almost missed. Some voices refused to be silenced. If this story inspired you, like, share, and subscribe for more.